Chapter 9. Developing Skills. Each man contains all possibilities within him because he is a manifestation of an eternal and infinite being. P.D. Ouspensky states, "Everything exists always. There is only one eternal present, the eternal now, which the weak and limited human mind can never grasp and conceive. Our mind follows the development of possibilities always in one direction only, but in fact every moment contains a very large number of possibilities, and all of them are actualized, only we do not see it and do not know it. We always see only one of the actualizations, and in this lies the poverty and limitations of human mind. But if we try to imagine the actualization of all the possibilities of the present moment, and then of the next moment, and so on, we shall feel the world growing infinitely, incessantly multiplying itself and becoming immeasurably rich, and like the flat and limited world we have hitherto pictured for ourselves." Clear channel to universal mind. A man may develop any skill he desires. The essence of his nature is to grow in the direction indicated by the images that form in his consciousness. Some people are born with a clear channel from one facet of their consciousness, and they are gifted. And though they are superhuman in one corner of their natures, in all else they are normal and subject to the same weak and ineffectual vision as everyone else. Such an earned perception of universal mind is sometimes more of a curse than a blessing, because the person possessing it expects illumination in other areas also, and is frustrated at being unable to find it. Rage and self-hate may grow out of such an unbalanced nature. Van Gogh cutting off his ear is an excellent illustration. Skills that we earn are the skills that delight us. People say, "Oh, I could never develop any skills. I don't have any talent." Well, lack of natural ability is no reason for curling up your toes and playing dead. The most important thing in life is growth, and it makes no difference where you start on the scale of capability. What is important is that you do not stay there, but progress. There is a quality in the psychic makeup of man that when impressed with desire and a picturization of that desire, he immediately sets about opening his eyes to the possibilities for achieving it in the material world. Knowing this, we eventually come to have a deep faith that the thing which we think about will become part of our lives. Modern Pied Piper. The man with the voice of a bullfrog probably will never give a concert at Carnegie Hall. But if he spends the major portion of his life learning to be a singer, he will be able to perform quite creditably someday. None of us lives long enough to develop completely in all directions. For this reason, the secret self created multitudes of individuals, and through this multiplicity seeks expansion in all areas. The individual himself functions best when he is able to determine those abilities most natural to him, and then sets about developing them to their highest possible level. To do this, he needs insight, and he most certainly needs to be free of mental blockages. A man sometimes seeks to develop his business ability because he desires to have money, when in truth he might find fulfillment in other fields. The end-gaining philosophy that has become predominant in our civilization is a Pied Piper leading down streets of frustration. It is better to lie on your back and look at the stars than to chase shadows if the chasing is not fun. A little child can run after illusions and take delight in every moment, but a man who pursues a wrath and is bound to it begrudges every ounce of energy expended in attempting to bring his illusory target to earth. 3 labourers were asked what they were doing. The first said, "I am working." The second said, "I am digging a ditch." The third said, "I am helping build a canal." Obviously, the third man took the most satisfaction from his labor because he saw that his work would create, and he was glad to be part of it. One who labors only to make a living begrudges the hours he must spend at his tasks. He looks at the clock at 10 and wishes it were noon, and he looks at the clock at 3 and wishes it were 5. He actually wishes away a large part of his life. Longing for mastery. We have to love the things we do in order to do them well. We have to like to perform the work regardless of the result. We have to not even care about the result and take our entire satisfaction from the action. When people have undergone great shocks, such as prolonged exposure to death and danger, or the loss of a limb or the death of a loved one, they often turn to work for work's sake as a preoccupation for their minds, and thus they discover one of life's deepest joys. And this engrossing of his whole nature makes him part of the work he does, and the work part of him. For surrender of self-concern to the task at hand rids the person of his tormenting ego, and he is able to get completely outside himself through becoming part of the work he is doing. We develop our skills through an inner love for the action involved. We will become musicians if we love music. We'll become writers if we love writing. We'll become builders if we love construction. We'll become businessmen if we love commerce. But we become nothing simply through a desire to be famous and rich. Such false desires are products of the ego. Even the slightest look at them gives us evidence of their insubstantiality. If we undertake to be a businessman, for instance, and we run into difficulties, and our reaction is one of depression and failure, we can be sure that we were led into our business endeavors in the first place through an egoistic desire to be better or more powerful than others. The businessman who loves business glories in his moments of trials, for it is then that he develops more understanding and more mastery. Since he loves business, he loves it when its nature is most acute, and therefore his times of trials are a joy. Such people inevitably are successful because they cannot be discouraged, because they love the thing that they are doing, whether it is going badly or well. They are unaffected by apparent turns of defeat and fortune, assess their own growth through having taken their eyes from the goal and becoming engrossed in the doing of their work. We learn by doing. Always we learn by doing. No amount of information injected into a man by books and lectures will make him the master of a skill. A skill is its own teacher, and each of us who aspires to mastery must become an apprentice. Ideas, facts, and abilities all come to the man who seeks to make himself more proficient, whether his field is creative, administrative, executive, or simply performing of labor. If he dedicates himself to a task for the love of doing it, eventually he will find himself highly capable when he attempts to learn a new skill. Our initial efforts are always inept, and the ego-conscious man often is stricken with discouragement and sometimes gives up further effort altogether. The enlightened man will not be dismayed by his initial ineptitude. He will know he is coming to grips with a new knowledge that will take time to seep down into subconscious levels. Educating the subconscious. The person who buckles on a pair of ice skates and ventures out onto a frozen pond for the first time is a sight to behold. His arms fail and his ankles bend. He fights desperately for balance, swoops forward and backward in a hair-raising battle to stay upright. He can neither start himself when he is stopped, nor stop himself when he is moving. and the only certain thing about his performance is that he is bound to wind up on the seat of his pants. Compare this novice skater with an Olympic champion. It seems incredible there could be any comparison, but there is. Not many years ago, the Olympic champion was just such a novice, and his proficiency today is only testimony to the power of the subconscious to direct the actions of body and mind with the utmost symmetry and perfection. When we first try to do something difficult or something beyond our ordinary grasp, we must first come to grips with it consciously by focusing our attention upon it. This period of conscious striving produces a tension within the psyche that stimulates subconscious activity, directing relief of the tension, producing resolution, giving dimension and control to the organisms. The more conscious the striving, the more tension produced in the subconscious, and the more the subconscious works to effect answers to the problems that confronts the individual. Turning effort into instincts. A young housewife recently told the story of how she came to be an accomplished pianist. I had been labouring at the piano for 4 years, she said. I had gotten to the point where I was able to play a number of compositions, but they were all wooden, came out with no feeling, seemed to lack rhythm. The few times that I played for my friends, I was actually embarrassed at their having to listen. I practiced every day, though sometimes as much as 3 hours. It seemed incredible that I made so little progress. I had always learned other things easily, but playing the piano seemed too much. Eventually, I became convinced I had no musical talent. One evening, at a party, a friend suggested that I play. A refusal rose rapidly to my lips, but suddenly I was overcome with the most wonderful feeling that I would be able to play well. I cannot say just how the feeling came. It certainly did not from itself in so many words. I just knew deep within myself that I would be able to play well, and I had a sudden insight into the relationship between the music and myself. The piano, the keys, the notes, and the sheet music all blended together and merged with me. I knew that when I sat down and began to play, I would play well because I would be performing outside myself and wouldn't have to think about it. When I sat down at the piano, I played exactly as I envisaged. The guests applauded and gathered around, and I played the rest of the evening. I have been playing well ever since, and the whole thing taught me a great lesson. We must never quit when we seem to be making no progress. We may go from the most inept novice to the most accomplished performer in that single moment when the hours of our efforts break through and merge with our instincts. The only real security. One skill that people seem most desirous of developing is that of making money. But making money is not a skill, it is the result of a skill. Money sought for itself will surely prove to be most elusive. It is not evil, it is good. Good because it is representative of work. But those who attempt to take it by avoiding work are corrupting its true purpose and shrinking their own natures. Henry Ford made this statement: if money is your only hope for independence, you will never have it. The only real security that a man can have in this world is a reserve of knowledge, experience, and ability. As a young man, Ford had little money, but he was sustained by the vision of his automobile. And his days and nights were full of work and thought. When that day arrived that every 10th family in America owned an automobile, Ford became a rich man. His fortune came to him not because it had been sought, but because he had rendered a service to millions of people. In our day and age and society, wealth is a natural result of serving a large number of people. All work is repaid in kind, and when we serve one person, He serves us also, and this owing of service usually results in the exchange of money. If we serve one person, we are paid so much. If we serve 2, we are paid more. If we serve 10, even more. If we serve 1,000,000, we are bound to become wealthy. We cannot help but create wealth when we find a work that needs to be done, and we cannot help but receive a portion of this wealth ourselves. That money breeds money is axiomatic, but only when such money is put to work creating wealth. When our savings are invested in activities that promote discovery and creation, they cannot help but make money, for they are being used in accordance with this primary law of life, that every service must be rewarded. Proper performance is always unthinking performance. Any other kind of action is ego-centered and based upon partial knowledge. A friend reports he can cut an apple exactly in half when he's not thinking about it, but when he concentrates, the halves no longer match. Innate in each man is an original mind, and knowledge there is not limited to that acquired through the senses. Egoistic conditioning causes mind to acquire a fixed idea of itself as a means of controlling itself, and consequently a man thinks of himself as I. The focus of his consciousness then shifts from original mind to ego image, and it becomes impossible for him to use original mind in any of his mental actions. Everything performed in response to the ego is intentional, affected, limited, and insecure. Spontaneous action. Basic in Zen Buddhism is the doctrine of unintentioned action. A Zen Buddhist disciple, an archer, is reported to have practiced for 3 years to let his arrows shoot themselves. When at last he was able to release the bowstring and consciously, in response to an intuitive action that had more to do with the target and arrow than his purpose, the effectiveness of his archery increased amazingly. But the moment he began to think of results, he no longer was able to let the arrow shoot itself, and his scores fell off at once. Spontaneity is the mark of the absolute. Universal mind does not need to think out things. It holds within itself at every moment the proper answer to each particular problem. It acts quickly and without thought. That which we do well, we do without effort because we have given over the doing of it to a will and power that lie outside of our conscious intentioned ego. A juggler keeps 8 balls in the air and people exclaim, "Isn't that incredible?" And it certainly is if we assume that the conscious mind is controlling the action. The conscious mind can hardly follow the action, let alone perform it. Juggling 8 balls is done by the subconscious, which directs all activity that takes on the coloration of skill or talent. This mind is not a multitude of minds, but only one. Therefore, all skill and all talent reflect the activity of a single person. All books are written by the same author. All pictures painted by the same artists. All music composed by the same composer. In every creative activity or accomplished performance, the same mind is responsible. A thing done well reflects the direction of the divine, and thus spiritually awakening is necessary to effective living. Becoming one with our tasks. If there is one mind common to all things and exclusive to none, it follows that we basically are all part of a single organism, and our effectiveness within that organism depends upon our recognition of this fact. As long as we view ourselves as separate selves, we are moved by the delusion of egoistic desire and thus led into opposition to the will of the secret self. Any action that is conceived in the ego and entered into for egoistic purposes is not doomed to failure from the outset and can result in only mediocre success. Its entire purpose and impulsion arise from a limited knowledge set against the ocean of knowledge that is universal mind. we learn to do things well by becoming one with them, by so engrossing ourselves in our tasks that we pick up a sense of unity with them. This sense of oneness is impossible to the egoistic nature for the simple reason that the ego itself is a sense of separateness. When we become completely absorbed in things, we have a true spiritual experience, for by this psychological transference of self, we plunge deeply into universal mind and become the work that we are doing. Everyone who has great skill or talent goes daily to the font of forgetfulness, plunges in and is renewed, and the temple of his religious worship is his own talent. Henry David Thoreau wrote, "If one advances confidently in the direction of his dreams and endeavours to live the life which he has imagined, he will meet with unexpected success in common hours." A man exceeds himself by aiming higher than he has ever aimed before. It is not the goal that is important, it is the aiming higher. When a goal is reached, it actually becomes a limitation unless replaced by a higher goal. A few years ago, a young man emerged from an automobile accident paralyzed from the neck down, except for the rudimentary use of the forefinger of his right hand. As he lay in bed and pondered his situation, he resolved to develop some skill with that right forefinger. He had a typewriter rigged on his bed, with his right arms slung before it so he could peck at the keys with his forefinger. His initial efforts were excruciatingly slow and required a great concentration and resolve. He laboured for hours to type a single sentence. As the weeks turned into months, he was able to type a page, then two, finally a dozen or more. After a year, he not only was typing proficiently, but was actually sitting up in bed to do it. Today, he gets about with crutches and has embarked upon a program of total rehabilitation. He seems well on the road to recovery. Such tenacity and purpose might be expected to belong to a very grim person, but this young man has deep humility and a wry sense of humour. When asked how he was able to accomplish such miraculous results, he stated, "I was given this body, and I banged it up. The least I can do is put it back in the condition I found it." Our imagination should be treated with precious care, for it is the tool of our liberation from the bonds that hold us. We can be anything we are capable of visualizing, do anything we are able to imagine, for the images that form in our minds inevitably lead us into the work that effects their realization. Who can say that anything is impossible to the mind and effort of man? There exists within him a power to imagine a better world than the one in which he lives, and he never ceases attempting to find it. Our imagination should be treated with precious care, for it is the tool of our liberation from the bonds that hold us. We can be anything we are capable of visualizing, do anything we are able to imagine, for the images that form in our minds inevitably lead us into the work that effects their realization. Be yourself. To thine own self be true, wrote Shakespeare, and it shall follow as the night the day. Thou canst not then be false to any man. It is important to act in accord with your own nature. When you live sincerely and feelingly, you become a pure channel for the expression of the divine. Each of us is accorded a unique individuality. As long as that individuality is unhampered by inhibition and fear, it is capable of expressing something different and vital. But when it is restricted and limited by apprehension, it cannot express itself at all. The dammed up torrent of universal energy then turns upon itself, and the dual sides of the ego nature, like the gingham dog and the calico cat, eat each other up. Countless people are restrained from learning because they are afraid to try. In them is a false pride that is connected directly to the ego, and it will not let them perform awkwardly because it has no humility, and it will not let them begin anything and be novices because it cannot stand any idea of itself that is not better than others. If a man be rid of ego self and have accepted that he is only an instrument of divine will and action, he is able to embark upon the learning of a skill with the utmost humility and deep indifference to the opinions of others. He can be laughed at without shame. He can be jeered at without ridicule. He can laugh at himself, he can ridicule himself, but all the while his vision burns brightly, and he knows that one day he will have the attainment of the skill. He has no fear, for fear is possible only to the ego, and the ego has been subordinated in his nature. He embarks upon all enterprises with courage, persistence, and faith. Just because he toils endlessly at the door of creation, that door eventually yields and marvelous works are wrought through him because his hand is moved by the divine. Whatever your aspiration, remember this: the master of that skill is within you. He who already possesses it is greatest of all. Give over the doing of your work to him and get yourself out of the way, and you will find that you are soon performing with consummate knowledge and skill.